So I think it's time to start this sixth and last session for this weekend Shamatha practice retreat, focusing on mindfulness of breathing. Let's have a look at what we'll be covering in this session. First, we'll do a mindfulness of breathing meditation where you get to choose which variation you would like to follow. Then we'll do a short summary of the main points of Shamatha practice. We'll then look at these prerequisites, how to set up our life to support Shamatha practice. And then we'll look at preliminary practices, the foundation for Shamatha, some general advice, how to set up our day with this Shamatha practice, and then a meditation of building a vision for this life, question answer, and finish with a dedication. So in this first meditation, we'll do mindfulness of breathing again. You get to choose whichever variation you would prefer to do. So the full body breath practice, focusing on the rhythm of the breath, focusing on the abdomen or entrance and nostrils. So your choice, but with whatever variation you use, remembering to keep that basis in relaxation, particularly if you're focusing on the nostrils, to really be careful not to get caught up in any tension. And if you're finding yourself getting distracted a lot and you find it helpful, you can introduce a bit of counting or noting the breath. And again, if you're using the nostrils and you have a lot of tension, even if you're focused well, but you can't release it, then don't stay there. Go back into the full body or the abdomen to reestablish a basis in relaxation. Let's do that practice now. Setting the body into a state of relaxation, stillness, and vigilance. Allowing the breathing to settle into its natural rhythm. And setting the mind in a state of ease and relaxation. Releasing all activities of the mind. And simply allowing the mind to come to rest in the stillness of the present moment. And now shift your attention and focus on the sensations of the breath, whichever variation you prefer. Full body, rhythm of the breath, abdomen or nostrils. And maintaining an ongoing flow of mindfulness of the sensations of the breath throughout the entire cycle of each in and out breath. Relaxing and releasing any agitation, tension, or distraction on the out breath, and sharpening the focus on the in breath. we can bring the meditation to a close. So let's begin with a summary of the Shamatha practice. In the Shamatha training, the 2 points that we'll be looking at a little bit later in this session is the prerequisites for Shamatha and how to integrate Shamatha practice into daily life. But of the other points in the Shamatha practice, the preparation, we saw the importance of preparing body, speech, and mind well at the beginning of each meditation session, to not cut that short, to really establish a good posture, to let the breathing settle, to bring the mind into the present moment, and to really have a good basis for the actual meditation. And in the actual Shamatha practice, we saw the 3 qualities we are cultivating in this practice: relaxation, stability, clarity. And again, using that tree analogy, is that first we really need to sink the deep roots of relaxation that will help support the trunk of stability, and that will help support the branches and leaves of clarity, to really emphasize them in this order, establishing first that basis in relaxation. And then in terms of the object, we use the object that is most widely emphasized in many Buddhist traditions, and probably the object that is most suitable for many of us in the modern world, at least initially, and that is mindfulness of breathing. Because many of us are caught up in a lot of obsessive compulsive thinking. And so this is the recommendation for those of us who are like that. Particularly also Sangha recommends it in that way. And we looked at 3 variations of that breath practice in this weekend retreat. The full body breath practice, very good for relaxation. Also the rhythm of the breath. The abdomen, good for focus, for improving stability of attention. Nostrils, conducive for improving clarity of attention. And then we mentioned a couple of other objects that you may find particularly suitable for this practice: observing the mind, resting in awareness, or even a mental image of a Buddha. So again, the recommendation is to try these various objects out for a while to see which one really resonates with you, and then use the object that works best for you to move along these various stages of Shamatha. And the 2 tools we use in this practice we saw were mindfulness and introspection. The rope of mindfulness to tie our mind to the object, to hold the object. And then introspection is quality control, monitoring that mindfulness, noticing if we're becoming dull or distracted. And of the 2 tools, mindfulness is primary. And if we simply improve our mindfulness, then our ability to introspect, our quality control, will naturally improve as well. And then we had those 5 faults and 8 antidotes to overcome the laziness, to really reflect on the benefits of the practice, to have faith and thereby aspire to do the practice, to have enthusiasm in the practice. And then eventually that physical and mental pliancy is the ultimate antidote to laziness. Forgetfulness, the antidote; mindfulness, to remember the instructions, remember the object. And introspection, quality control, noticing if we're becoming dull or distracted. In other words, laxity and excitation. Non-application means that the fault is if we got dull or distracted, we don't do anything about it, that's a fault. So apply the antidote. The antidote would normally mean simply reapply mindfulness to the object. And then over-application is something that can become a problem higher in the practice if we are unnecessarily adjusting our focus when we don't need to do that. So if we apply those 8 antidotes to those 5 faults, we can move through these 9 stages to Shamatha. And we saw here that the 2 main imbalances are laxity and excitation. So laxity is this sinking of the mind. And then the first line approach of how to overcome laxity is simply tighten your apprehension, meaning sharpen your focus on the object. If that's not really working, the backup strategy is to stop focusing on the object and then inspire ourselves by cultivating delight in doing this practice. And if that's not even working, then the last ditch thing to do is to stop the meditation and clear away the laxity by maybe going for a walk, throwing some water on the face and so forth. And similarly, excitation is this agitated mind that's chasing after generally the sense pleasures. And if we have a slight excitation, slight distraction, simply let go of the distraction, bring the mind back to the object. If it becomes very strong and we're getting distracted a lot, then we need to stop focusing on the object and bring the mind down by reflecting on impermanence in terms of death and impermanence, but also impermanence in terms of the objects we're chasing after. They're not going to satisfy. So bring the mind down. And if that's not even working, then the last ditch strategy for excitation is, again, stop the meditation and really cultivate this sense of disenchantment with chasing after all of those distractions that we're constantly following. So there's sort of the strategies we have for both laxity and excitation. And then we can move through these 9 stages to shamatha. We looked at those stages from directed attention up to attentional balance, and those 6 powers which help us to go deeper and deeper into the practice, and then the 4 types of mental engagement on the objects. And now we'll go to looking at prerequisites. How to set up our life in such a way to support this practice. And this is also very nicely described in Attention Revolution. So I'd like to introduce these 6 prerequisites, reading a little bit from Attention Revolution on page 50. And he says the following. When I lead shamatha seminars, I like to think of them as expeditions rather than retreats. The word retreat has the connotation not only of withdrawal, but also of defeat. And that certainly isn't the spirit of such practice. The word expedition, on the other hand, suggests adventure, conquest, and exploration. The Latin roots of the word have to do with extricating yourself, literally stepping out of some situation in which you've gotten stuck. In the practice of shamatha, we discover how deeply our minds are trapped in the twin ruts of excitation and laxity. In the Buddhist tradition, a mind trapped in these ruts is said to be dysfunctional. And in order to make it serviceable, it is helpful to step out of our normal activities, seek out a spacious sense of solitude, and explore the frontiers of the mind. This expedition doesn't require blind faith or allegiance to any religious creed or metaphysical belief system. Over the past 3 millennia, contemplatives from various Asian cultures with diverse belief systems have followed the path of shamatha to its culmination, and they have reported their findings. We don't need to accept their claims simply on their own authority, but if we are inspired by earlier accounts of the benefits of this practice, we may venture forth on this path to see for ourselves whether we can achieve the results of the contemplative explorers who have preceded us. There are great adventures ahead, but also perils and dead ends. Sometimes the path is clear, but now and then it may seem to disappear altogether. The purpose of relying on those who know this path from their own experience is to save time. 6 prerequisites for sustained rigorous training are set forth in many Indian and Tibetan Buddhist manuals, meditation manuals. These are some of the essential causes and conditions that will produce the fruit of shamatha. So these 6 prerequisites are normally presented in the context of someone who wants to go off and do a longer shamatha retreat, how to set up that environment to support such a retreat. But here, as we'll see, even if we're not planning to do some sort of long retreat, if we take care of these 6 prerequisites and try to gather them in our life, that would provide a very good basis for a more contemplative lifestyle where we can really focus on improving ourselves and meditating and so forth. The first of the 6 prerequisites is the sort of outer conditions. The other 5 are inner conditions. And the first one is supportive environment. And here in the meditation texts, a number of things are mentioned, such as easy access, meaning to food and water and so forth. Again, if you're in a meditation retreat setting, a safe place that's not full of dangers and so forth, a healthy place, one without disease. And then this one here, the 4th one, is very important, good friends. This brings up the idea in Buddhism of sangha, of spiritual community, that if we are to follow a spiritual path, and we have this sort of attitude, I can do this by myself, I'm an independent sort of person, then I think you're going to find it extremely difficult to follow any spiritual path, because we now have a lot of habits and they're easily influenced by others. So it's easy to get swept up in our old habits. And I know from personal experience and talking to many people. So if we really want to follow a spiritual path, we need these good friends, some like-minded people, the idea of spiritual sangha, spiritual community. Get connected with them, help them, they can help us. We need help and support in the practice. So I can't overemphasize this point enough in terms of a supportive environment. Get connected. And then a quiet place is very helpful for meditation. Then the next two are connected: having few desires and being content. And having few desires is with respect to what we don't have. And here we're talking about material possessions and wealth and so forth. And being content is with respect to things that we do have. And so if we don't have few desires and we have lots of desires, and we're not content with what we have, then we're going to put all of our time and energy in accumulating more wealth, gathering more possessions, having a nicer car, bigger house, nicer holidays, and so forth. We're not going to have any time to develop ourselves in meditation practice. And then the fourth one is few activities, meaning to simplify our life. I often hear people say, oh, I'd really like to meditate, but I don't have time to meditate. That, I think, is never a valid excuse. The reality is that many of us in the modern world, though, have very busy lives. And we fill up our day with lots of stuff. Some of the things that we do are necessary. Most of us need to work at some level to have enough money to have a roof over our head and food and so forth. Some of us have some family responsibilities that are essential, and some of us have some other responsibilities essential. But above and beyond those essential responsibilities, we tend to fill up our day with lots of stuff, lots of activities, and we tend to do it for one of two reasons. One is that it's often felt in our modern society, if we're not doing something, we're not being productive. So just do something. And the other thing is, if we're sitting there quietly doing nothing, that really forces us to look at our mind, which is a mess. So we don't like what we see, so we just busy ourselves to distract ourselves. Now, to simplify our life, we could forcibly cut things out of our life, but I think that's always going to be a struggle. That's not really going to work. Rather, to really do that, we can reflect on two of the early preliminary practices that we're going to look at shortly. And that is to reflect on precious human life, that we've got a life full of opportunities, and to reflect on death, meaning that we don't know how long it's going to last. And so therefore, to take advantage of this precious opportunity while we have it. And if we really appreciate this precious life we have full of opportunities, it's not going to last forever, then I think what you'll find is that all of these extra activities that we fill up our day with that don't really bring us anything, we're going to lose interest in them. And then suddenly we'll have a lot of more time and energy and space to dedicate to meditation and more meaningful activities. And on that point, I'd like to read a short quote from an address given by Steve Jobs. I think you all know who Steve Jobs was. And he gave, the founder of Apple Computers, of course, and he gave this address to students at Stanford University some years ago. So I'd just like to read two paragraphs. And he says, when I was 17, I read a quote that went something like, if you live each day as if it was your last, someday you'll most certainly be right. It made an impression on me. And since then, for the past 33 years, I have looked in the mirror every morning and asked myself, if today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I'm about to do today? And whenever the answer has been no for too many days in a row, I know I need to change something. Remembering that I'll be dead soon is the most important tool I've ever encountered to help me make the big choices in life. Because almost everything, all external expectations, or pride, or fear of embarrassment or failure, these things just fall away in the face of death, leaving only what is truly important. Remembering that you're going to die is the best way I know to avoid the trap of thinking you have something to lose. You are already naked. There is no reason there is no reason not to follow your heart. So I think some good advice there from Steve Jobs. So these are part of the preliminary practices, Precious Human Life and Death. We'll look again shortly. And if we really internalize that, I think you'll find that you will have time to meditate and devote yourself to meaningful activities. The fifth one is ethical discipline. And I think ethical lifestyle is the basis of any sort of meaningful lifestyle. And here in Attention Revolution, Alan Wallace is not only talking about social ethics, but he also talks about environmental ethics and psychophysical ethics in terms of looking after our body and mind in a healthy way. And then the sixth point is letting go of compulsive thinking. We all tend to have some obsessive compulsive thinking, and it's generally often about things out there that we feel like we need to be happy, or things out there that we need to avoid suffering. And so we have a lot of obsessive compulsive thinking about these things in the future. And so one of the things that can help reduce letting go of, or let go of obsessive compulsive thinking is, again, these preliminary practices to cultivate this view of genuine happiness, that the source of happiness and suffering is not out there, it's within our own mind. And if we can do that, we can let go a lot of this obsessive compulsive thinking. And then here Tsongkhapa says, of the six, he says, the most important ones are good ethical discipline. So this is the basis, I think, of any meaningful lifestyle. Seeing desires as disadvantageous, again, to see that chasing after sense pleasures and money and wealth is not really going to be helpful, and dwelling in an appropriate area, having a good supportive environment, particularly like-minded friends to help support us. And so this is very important. And here, to summarize these six, I'd again like to read from Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace. On page 54, he says the following. In our material society, even for people who are drawn to non-materialistic values, there is a strong tendency to take our current way of life as the norm and then add meditation to fix it, like a Band-Aid applied to a festering wound. And this actually is a little bit, unfortunately, how mindfulness is being a little bit presented in some modern day traditions, that they often get mindfulness from the Buddhist context. They take it out and they strip away all the other things because, that's all that Buddhist stuff. We don't want that. Let's just give pure mindfulness. And so then it's often presented as the magic pill of mindfulness. Here, take this magic pill of mindfulness and all your problems will go away. They won't go away. In fact, they could get worse. Because if we have a dysfunctional lifestyle and we apply a little bit of mindfulness, we may just become better at deceiving and cheating people and thereby creating more problems for ourselves. So therefore, we need an integrated approach. And so this is what Alan Wallace goes on to say. He says, my first experience with meditation in the late 1960s is a good example. I went to a teacher who gave me a mantra and told me how to meditate on it. But in these instructions, there was no reference to the way I should lead the rest of my life. Even now, decades later, meditation is often taught with little or no reference to any of the above prerequisites. It has been reduced to a kind of first aid to alleviate the symptoms of a dysfunctional life with all its anxieties, depression, frustration, and emotional vacillations. For a mind that is assaulted with a myriad of mental afflictions such as craving, hostility, and delusion, we need more than a medic. We need long-term intensive care. That's what this training is all about. And we'll talk a little bit more about that idea of having an integrated approach shortly. Even if we want to really implement these prerequisites, then I think even before that, we need to establish an effective, supportive worldview. And that is, where is the source of happiness and suffering come from? Because as long as we believe the source of my happiness and suffering's out there, then of course we're going to have a lot of desires for material things, and we're going to have a lot of aversion to those unpleasant things. And we're not going to be able to put any effort into meditation, because we'll be lazy when it comes to meditate, because we'll be too busy chasing after all those sensory pleasures. And so if we have that worldview that the source of happiness and suffering is outside, i.e., that's the view is what is happening to us, then we'll tend to see pleasure as happiness, pain as suffering. And then it's all about what we can get from the world and what we can avoid out there in the world. And then the world doesn't appear very user-friendly, because there's a lot of unpleasant things coming at us there. And then we'll be very lazy when it comes to meditate, because we won't have time, because we'll be too busy chasing after all of those material possessions and wealth and pleasures and so forth. And then shamatha will become what's called, shamatha practice will become what's more called, someone coined this term, mindfulness, like fast food mindfulness, simply applying mindfulness a little bit to our dysfunctional lifestyle. And then it'll be like Alan Wallace says, it'll be like a Band-Aid applied to a festering wound. It won't really solve any problems if we continue to have this worldview and simply add a little bit of mindfulness. That's not really going to work. So therefore, as a basis, to really shift that worldview, to really come to see the source of suffering and happiness is not out there anywhere. It lies within our own mind. And so then it's not so much about what happens to us, but rather how we respond to what happens to us. And so in this worldview, we come to realize that pleasure is not happiness, and that pain is not suffering, that it's more about what we can bring from the world rather than what we can get from the world. Then the world is very user-friendly, because we can always bring something to the world. And so pain only becomes suffering through our aversion to pain, unpleasant experiences. So it's how we, and of course, attachment to pleasure also leads to suffering. So it's how we respond will lead to suffering. And so the source of suffering, source of happiness lies within ourselves. Then we'll have a lot of enthusiasm to meditate, because we'll realize that the source of genuine happiness lies within our own mind, and that shamatha is the gateway to genuine happiness. So if we can shift that worldview, then that's an excellent foundation for then engaging in shamatha practice in a very integrated, structured way. How do we establish that worldview of genuine happiness? And so here in Buddhism, we talk about the preliminary practices. And in a number of the particularly Tibetan Buddhist traditions, they package these into what's called the 4 thoughts. The 4 thoughts that turn the mind away from looking out there for happiness and suffering, source of suffering, to turn the mind inwards to look for source of suffering and source of happiness within our own mind. And there are 4 practices to do here. And a couple of them have already been mentioned in earlier slides. The first one is, this life of leisure and opportunity is extremely difficult to find, i.e., to reflect on precious human life, that we've got a life full of opportunities, so let's make our life meaningful. And then the measure of birth is impermanence and death. To understand that this precious opportunity we have is not going to last forever. In fact, we don't know how long it's going to last. So let's make our life meaningful right now, and not be one of these people later in our life, look back on our life, and we're full of regrets at having wasted our life. But then how to make our life meaningful? The third preliminary practices is to reflect on the causality of our actions, to understand that harmful actions lead to suffering, beneficial actions lead to happiness, and thereby adopt an ethical lifestyle. So this is the foundation for having a meaningful lifestyle. But to go one step further then, to reflect on the 4th of the 4 thoughts, where it says here, the 3 realms of samsara are just an ocean of suffering, meaning to reflect on what is suffering, what is happiness, what is the cause of suffering, what is the cause of happiness, to come to realize that suffering is not anywhere out there, that the source of suffering lies within our own mind, that it's our mental afflictions like craving, attachment, jealousy, anger, fear, anxiety. This is what's driving our behavior and leading to our suffering. And if we can understand that, we can understand we can eliminate these mental afflictions through the shamatha, then the vipassana practice, and find that genuine happiness, and thereby shift the worldview. Understanding the source of suffering and happiness lies within our own mind. So if we can engage in these 4 preliminary practices, this is really the foundation. And by doing this, developing this view of genuine happiness, then it's going to be much easier to implement these prerequisites for shamatha practice, because then we will have few material desires and be content, because we will know that the source of happiness is not coming from out there. We'll have a more simplified lifestyle. We'll have that ethical basis discipline, and we'll be able to more easily let go of that obsessive compulsive thinking about how to get those things that are going to make me happy, how to avoid those things out there that seem to give me suffering. So having that basis through the preliminary practices, the view of genuine happiness, we will really be able to effectively set up our life in a conducive way through these prerequisites. Then we're going to have a lot of enthusiasm to meditate. We'll definitely be able to overcome that laziness, because we'll understand that the shamatha practice is the key that opens the gate to genuine happiness. And then also in an everyday life level, this also will enable our career to be more rewarding, because as long as we have the worldview, the source of my happiness is coming from out there, then whatever career we have, it's not going to be enough. It'll never be fully satisfying. We'll always want more. But if we shift the worldview, then it's not about what we can get from our career, but what we can give through our career and what I can bring to the world. And then we'll find that our career, whatever it is, will be much more rewarding. And then also we'll be able to see difficult situations as opportunities. Because if we have a worldview that the source of suffering is out there, then when we're faced with a difficult situation, then that is definitely a problem. And we need to, we'll have aversion to that. And then it'll become a big, we'll experience a lot of suffering. Whereas if we understand the source of suffering, the source of happiness lies within our own mind, when we're faced with a difficult situation, we'll be able to see it as an opportunity. Because we know from our own experience that if our life is going quite well, then we tend to float along and not really develop as a person. But when we are challenged with difficult situations, that challenges us to develop as a person. So these difficult situations are really opportunities to develop ourselves and to bring more to the world. So that's a little bit about the prerequisites and the genuine happiness, the view of genuine happiness. Now, some general advice. When to meditate? Then daily meditation practice, of course, is important to develop that habit. And the best is to meditate early in the morning, because we're most rested, it's generally most quiet where we are, and it's a good way to start the day. Now, one of the most difficult things in having a daily meditation practice is simply to develop the habit. And if we're meditating at different times each day, we're not really developing a habit. So therefore, pick a time that works for you and stick to that time. And make sure that we meditate at that time every day to develop the habit. Because once we've developed the habit, and studies show that we need like 25 or 30 days of doing the same thing to develop a habit, then once we've developed the habit, it becomes easier to do the daily meditation practice. So to develop the habit, I would recommend setting a challenge. So maybe first you say, okay, for the next 7 days, I'm going to meditate at this time every day. Once you've done that a few times, then you can say, okay, for the next 30 days, I'm going to meditate every day at this time. Where to meditate? As we saw in those prerequisites in the supporting environment, quiet location. Because one of the biggest distractions as a beginner is noise. If you can't have a quiet location where you are, I really recommend noise cancelling headphones. I use them a lot when I'm in a noisy environment, I find them very helpful. So that can really help if you find yourself in a noisy environment. Ideally, it would be good if you have a separate room, a meditation room at home to meditate, but most of us don't have that luxury. Then at least set aside a corner of your room to meditate and make it inviting and comfortable. And so you start to associate that with meditation. If we simply meditate on our bed, we tend to associate bed with sleep. So when we meditate on our bed, we maybe just get very drowsy and sleepy. And then in the environment, also adjust the lighting and temperature to suit, because if it's too hot, we get drowsy, too light, we may get agitated. So adjust lighting and temperature to suit. How long to meditate? We already covered that in an earlier session. Always emphasize quality over quantity, because if we meditate too long and we can't sustain it, we're just going to get caught up in a lot of laxity and excitation. How long will depend on us as an individual, but as a beginner, 15 minutes we've been doing, 20 minutes, maybe even 25 minutes. And again, use a timer. And we saw the advantages earlier for using a timer. And then as we get deeper into the practice, then we will need to slowly increase the amount of time you meditate to go further into the practice. If we're only ever meditating 15 minutes every morning, then there's only so much progress we can make. But don't, double the time you meditate from one day to next, 3 to 5 minute increments. So that's some general advice about when, where, and how long to meditate. Now some advice about making effort in practice. Training the mind requires effort. But here we shouldn't think effort means that we have to sort of grit our teeth and force our way, push our way in our practice. Then if that's the way we practice, we've completely lost. If we see practice as some sort of hardship that we have to endure, then we're not going to go anywhere. We've completely missed the point. Effort here in Buddhism is defined as a mind that delights in virtue. So as we saw earlier, if we really reflect on the benefits of these practices, then we'll be very happy to do these practices. And when we're happy to do them, then they really become effortless, and we can really put a lot of effort into these sort of practices. So therefore, it's very important to maintain a joyful mind. If we see practice as some sort of hardship we have to endure, we're not going to go anywhere. The continuity to progress, the key to progress is continuity. And that means to train the mind on a daily basis, to have a daily meditation practice, and then also to integrate what we meditate on into daily life. How to do that, we'll look at shortly. But also what can be very helpful is maybe on an annual basis to do a retreat. If possible, I mean, now with COVID, a little bit difficult, but when that is over and we have the opportunity to attend a meditation retreat, then that can really give us a boost to our practice and get a lot of inspiration as well. So I recommend, if possible, at least once a year to go to like a group meditation retreat for a week or so. Also, avoid unrealistic expectations, particularly that simply some new intellectual ideas about the spiritual practice will automatically change our life. They won't. We have to implement them. We have to internalize them by meditating and integrating into daily life. And also another unrealistic expectation is that my practice will get better every week, that every day my practice will sort of go like this, that each day getting a bit better. I don't know anyone in the beginning stages in particular whose practice goes like that. In the early stages particularly, there's a lot of ups and downs. And from one day to the next, we don't know what our mind is going to do. Some days our mind is naturally more quiet and still and the practice goes a lot better. On other days, our minds are much more agitated and tension and so forth. And so it's a lot of ups and downs in our practice. And again, it's not really what happens to us in our practice that's important. It's how we respond to what happens to us in the practice. And when we're faced with difficulties in our practice, then that's an excellent opportunity to really go deeper into the practice, to develop as a person. And to see them, again, difficult situations as these opportunities, not as some sort of problems or obstacles to our practice. And then again, the last point, and I can't overemphasize this point enough, is the importance of like-minded friends, as we saw earlier in the prerequisites, the idea of spiritual sangha, that if we try to do all of this on our own, I think you're going to find it extremely difficult, if not impossible, because we're just going to simply get swept up in our old habits, and we're going to get easily influenced by things around us and get swept away. And so therefore, find those like-minded people, get connected with them, maybe meet together regularly, support each other, and then you'll find it's going to be a little bit easier to start doing these sorts of practices and to make some progress in practice. So that's some general advice. So the next point then is how to set up the day. Very good to set a good motivation at the beginning of every day. And here's a motivation I particularly like from His Holiness Dalai Lama. And he says, every day, think as you wake up, I'm going to benefit others as much as I can. I think if we can start the day with this motivation, that's an excellent way to start the day. And then in the morning, to start with a meditation. And here, I think in the beginning stages, it's very good to really emphasize the shamatha practice, to really improve our attention skills. And here in this weekend retreat, we've mainly focused on the mindfulness of breathing, the full body, abdomen, nostrils practice. And so this practice will help to really calm the mind and focus the mind. But I wouldn't recommend only doing shamatha practice. We really need an integrated approach. And so we saw here, sorry, that it's important, particularly as a basis for shamatha, these preliminary practices. So if we're really finding that we're quite lazy when it comes to meditating, then it would be good to put some effort into these preliminary practices, such as reflecting on precious human life and death and so forth. But also to the two main wings of practice of wisdom and compassion, to also do these sorts of practices well, to have a more integrated approach, to really open our heart with loving kindness and compassion, to really start to cut through our distorted view of reality through the Vipassana practice, and thereby reducing our mental afflictions and suffering. And so if you are going to do 2 sessions in the morning, if you can sustain like maybe 2 15-minute sessions, then I would recommend first 15 minutes or so, shamatha, and the second one is some sort of analytical, one of these preliminary practices, or a compassion, loving kindness practice, or a Vipassana practice. If you're only doing 1 session in the morning, then some sessions you can maybe do just shamatha, but then some sessions start with a little bit of shamatha and then finish with one of the other meditation practices. So very helpful to have an integrated approach. Now, how to do these other analytical type meditations, such as the preliminary practices, Vipassana and compassion, we can be very flexible and whatever we find very helpful depending on what's going on in our life. Again, if we find ourselves being very lazy when it comes to meditating, caught up in a lot of sensory craving and so forth, then these preliminary practices, particularly precious human life and death, very helpful. If we're finding we're just quite apathetic and indifferent to others, then I would recommend putting some effort into loving kindness and compassion practices. If we're finding a lot of jealousy and we find a lot of despair in our life, then one of these, this practice called empathetic joy within the compassion wing of practices. And there's a lot of grasping and attachment to pleasurable things, then to really put some effort into Vipassana practice, particularly either impermanence or this wisdom of emptiness. And so therefore we can be very flexible with these other sorts of practices, depending on what's going on in our life, and add those sort of practices which we find most beneficial, depending on the situation we find ourselves currently in our life. And so then start the day with this sort of meditation practice, but then to integrate what we meditate on in daily life. And so in terms of shamatha, then to really continue to practice mindfulness through the day, to seed the day with mindfulness. And so here it's very helpful to use triggers to remind ourselves to be mindful, because in the morning we can say, oh, I'm going to be mindful throughout the day. And then probably after 5 minutes, we've forgotten that. Whereas if we use triggers to remind ourselves to be mindful, and those triggers can take many different forms. For example, whenever we notice we're tense during the day, just stop and do a little mindfulness exercise. Focus on the breath for 3 breaths. Or in certain activities, particularly physical activities, make a effort to be fully present in that physical activity. And then there's certain apps we can use on our smartphones, like mindfulness bell and so forth, that we can program that gives a little signal or little bell maybe once an hour. And so when that happens, stop whatever we're doing and then just do a little mindfulness exercise. Keep it short, maybe just focus on the breath for 3 breaths. And so if we then seed the day with mindfulness in these ways, then we'll start to really improve our mindfulness that we're cultivating in Shamatha practice. And then one way to help let go of obsessive compulsive thinking is to really anchor ourselves in the breath. So when we find ourselves getting caught up in a lot of obsessive compulsive thinking, go back in the body and just simply anchor ourselves in the breath a little bit. And then lastly, to have this witnessing mode in daily life. And here, for this, I'd like to read this quote at the top of the slide from Viktor Frankl. And he says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Now, if we have some stimulus, then we tend to react out of habit. So we're sort of stimulus reaction machines. And often the way we react is not so helpful. But there is a little gap between the stimulus and when we react or respond. And so to catch that gap, we have a little window of opportunity. And that is that if we've cultivated mindfulness through the Shamatha practice, then we'll be able to catch that little window of opportunity rather than just simply react out of habit. We'll notice the stimulus, we'll notice what's going on, and then instead of automatically reacting, we'll be able to respond appropriately. So instead of reacting to pleasant and unpleasant things with attachment and aversion, we will be able to respond more with loving kindness and compassion. But we'll only be able to take advantage of this space, as Viktor Frankl says, if we have mindfulness through the Shamatha practice. And then we have the power to choose our response, to choose loving kindness and compassion rather than attachment and aversion. And as Viktor Frankl says, in that our response lies our growth and our freedom. So therefore, this is very helpful or very important in daily life. And so Shamatha practice will help us to be able to gain access to that gap between stimulus and reaction. And then at the end of the day, what to do there? If we have time, we can do a second meditation. And if we're a little bit fatigued and we want to meditate, great, we can use that Shavasana posture that we looked at yesterday. And then if we're doing 2 meditations in the day, one in the morning and one in the evening, I would recommend doing a Shamatha meditation in the morning. And then in the evening, when we're maybe a little bit more tired, do a more analytical meditation, such as one of these preliminary practices, compassion or vipassana. Much more active meditations can be very more suitable in the evening. And then when we go to bed, as a transition to sleep, we can use this Shavasana posture. So then we can, when we go to bed, lie down in the Shavasana posture, and then we can do 2 things. First, we can review our day. How did our day go? And then pick one negative thing we did during the day, and then go through this purification process where we regret the negative action we did. This reliance means to reaffirm the positive direction in our life. Think of some sort of practical remedy for that negative action. For example, if we verbally abuse someone at work, we say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to apologize, and then resolve, make a strong determination not to do that negative thing the next day. And so in that way, we can purify the mind of those negative habits. But then equally important, maybe even more important, is pick one positive thing we did during the day and then rejoice, be happy about having done that action and resolve, make a strong determination to continue doing that good behavior the next day. In that way, we can increase our positive habits. But also important, think of one thing we received during the day and develop a sense of gratitude for having received that. And we receive many things every day. So this is a very good way to very briefly review the day. And then as we transition to sleep in the Shavasana posture, then on every out breath, releasing any tension in the body, releasing any thoughts in the mind, and just keep doing that until you start to get drowsy. When you get drowsy, you just mentally note, my meditation is finished, and then physically move out of that posture in whatever posture you use for sleep. And so in this way, we can use the Shavasana posture to transition to sleep. So this is a little bit of how we can set up our day, particularly based on this Shamatha practice. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to do a meditation where we reflect on our vision for this life. What do we really want to achieve in this life to really help us to set up this view of genuine happiness and to really have an effective framework for our Shamatha practice? So let's do that practice now. Find a nice, comfortable posture. Let's begin. We begin by establishing a good posture, back straight, and allow the entire body to become completely relaxed. Using the out-breath to relax and release any tightness or tension in any part of the body. Allowing the breathing to flow naturally and effortlessly. And allowing our mind to come to rest in the present moment. Resting in that stillness. Now, no matter how much mental afflictions are in our mind, that is, no matter how much craving and attachment, anger and jealousy, fear and anxiety, and so forth are in our mind, these mental afflictions are not part of the nature of our mind. They're merely like dirt covering the surface of our mind. And beneath these mental afflictions is the natural purity of our mind. So imagine this inner purity of your mind in the form of a small, white, radiant sphere of light in the center of your chest at the level of your heart. And then we can begin to build a vision for this life by reflecting on 4 points. And the first point is, what are your deepest aspirations in this life? What is your heart's desire? What would you really like to achieve in this life? And try to picture your deepest aspirations very clearly. And then arouse the thought, may I realize my deepest aspirations. And then with each out breath, imagine rays of light radiating out from the sphere of light at your heart and filling and saturating your entire body and mind. Imagining that your deepest aspirations are being fulfilled right here and now. Now, in order to help you fulfill your deepest aspirations, what kinds of material assistance would you like to receive from the world around you? And what kinds of friendship and guidance would you like to receive from the people around you? And then arouse the thought, may I receive everything that I need to help me realize my deepest aspirations. And then with each in-breath, imagine reality rising up in the form of white light, streaming in from all directions, providing you with everything you need. Now, the help that we receive from the world around us is not enough for us to realize the genuine happiness that we seek. For this, inner transformation is essential. So the third point to reflect on is, how would you like to transform and evolve as a person? What faults would you like to be free of? What qualities would you like to possess? And then arouse the aspiration, may I cultivate the true causes of my own fulfillment. And then with each out breath, imagine the white light of loving kindness radiating out from that sphere of light at your heart, filling your body and mind. Imagining that you're actually becoming that person with those qualities and free of those faults right here and now. And then finally, for the sake of your own fulfillment and to make your own life as meaningful as possible, what would you truly love to offer to the world? Using your own unique talents. And then with each out breath, imagine the white light of loving kindness radiating out in all directions from your heart as you actualize this offering to the entire world right here and now. We can bring the meditation to a close. We've got some time for question answer now. So again, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Do we have any questions from this or earlier sessions, Gal?
Yeah, we do from an earlier session.
Yeah, if we have none from the missed session, then we can go back to one of those.
Okay. So Hannah asked about the focus of the meditation on the nostrils. Is it helpful to look for the cold air in the out breath and the hot in the in breath?
That's that's one thing. As we get into the practice and our mind becomes more clear, this is certainly one thing that we're going to pick up. Probably initially either nothing or something vaguely there, but as we pay close attention and clarity improves, then one of the things we're going to notice is the difference in temperature of the air moving across this area. So that's already more clarity because we're picking up, and sometimes that, depending on what the ambient room temperature is, that could be quite subtle, or there could be. So that's a good sign. So yeah, we can notice that, and we can just simply keep noticing. We'll notice at some point, if we get very clear on the nostrils, it really feels like there's just like it's drenched with moisture, that there's a lot of moisture on the hair follicles underneath the nostrils. And then when we finish the meditation, we touch there, it's quite dry, in fact, but we really pick up very, very subtle sensations as the clarity improves. So that's good.
Thank you. The next question is from Iftach. Can you go further regarding how to do an analytical meditation?
Analytical meditation just means where we investigate, and it really depends on the type of meditation and so all the other meditations are analytical. So whether we're doing a meditation of cultivating loving kindness and compassion, or the meditation we just did is an example of an analytical meditation. Or if we're doing a Vipassana practice, we're investigating, looking for the me that seems to be here. That's also analytical. And so in that sort of meditation, we are searching for the me that seems to be here, and then coming to this insight that there is no independent me here. Whereas in the analytical meditations, such as loving kindness and compassion, we're doing some investigation, but the result is not some insight, but rather the transforming of our mind into a mind of loving kindness or compassion. Or, in example, the preliminary practices, precious human life, we may just reflect on a number of points about our life and how we have all these various opportunities and freedoms and so forth. And then at the end of the meditation, we will come to this sort of understanding or realization that we have a precious life full of opportunities that previously we sort of just took for granted. So it really depends on what type of meditation it is, how we go through the process of investigating, and what the result is, whether it's some sort of transforming of the mind into a positive state, or having some sort of insight arising. So there's a whole bandwidth of various analytical meditations. And in fact, in the 2 weeks' time, we'll have a compassion weekend retreat. And so there we'll be cultivating loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity, and so forth. And so these are all analytical meditations. And so then you'll see how we go about those sorts of analytical meditations in 2 weeks' time.
Nira is asking, how do you recommend to go about doing your own meditation if you're used to do only meditation with a guide?
Good question. What can be helpful is initially, when we're learning the meditation, is to listen to a recording of a guided meditation. Particularly if the meditation has a number of steps. Some of the analytical meditations have quite a number of steps that we need to go through. And so we probably would need to listen to that meditation quite a number of times to become familiar with the various steps. But also in shamatha practice, there are a number of things that we need to do and not do in shamatha practice. And so we can, for a little while, listen to guided meditation to become familiar with the practice. But then I would recommend to let go of listening to the recording, because otherwise we can get a little bit lazy. We just hit the play button and we sort of sit there and we're not really meditating, but we sort of think we are because we're sort of listening to something. So we can get a bit lazy. So once you know the meditation well, then don't listen to the recording. You'll know what to do yourself. But then down the track, maybe after some weeks or months, it can be helpful to go back to the recording again, listen again, because sometimes we start to introduce things that are not in the practice, and we start to do the practice not so correct. And so then if we go back to listen to the recording after a few weeks or months, we may pick up the fact that we're sort of going a little bit astray in the practice. And also, if we need a little bit of inspiration, then we can listen to the guided meditation as well. But so that's what I would recommend, to listen a little bit to guided meditation, become familiar, but then we really need to do the meditation ourselves. Otherwise, we will become lazy and rely too heavily on the guidance, and then we will find it difficult to progress any further in the practice.
Thanks. Na is saying that during the meditation with the nostrils, she feels her pulse on her upper lip. Should she pay any attention to it or ignore it?
If that is within the area you're focusing on. So when you focus the entrance to nostrils, you can focus either at the actual entrance to nostrils or this little area above the upper lip. So if you're feeling the pulse within that area, that is a tactile sensation. It's not specifically related to the breath, but we want continuity of attention, because when we're breathing, between the in and out breath, there's a little gap where there's no air moving across this area, but there's still sensations in this area. But if the sensations sort of fall outside of that little area, then just ignore it.
Thank you. Ayelet wanted to share that she wanted to thank you deeply. This last meditation made me cry at the end of it, and I feel so relieved.
Good, very good. I'm very happy, very happy. Yeah, I think this sort of meditation can be very helpful to really, like I said, to reorient ourselves in our life, because, unfortunately, in most of modern societies, the complete emphasis is on the consumerism, that you need more stuff, and the media and everything is just pushing ourselves in that direction. And so we get caught up in the whole rat race of chasing after more money, more pleasure. And we're even if we try to break out of that and try to do our own thing, then often we get pushed back into that fold by our family members or the people around us, telling us, what are you doing? You're crazy. You need to do like this. And so I think this sort of meditation can be very helpful to really shift that mind. So I think, yes, very helpful. I like this meditation a lot.
Going back to questions from previous sessions.
Sure, I think we've got time for one or two more questions.
Okay. I see some new questions. So because of the gap between what the Western society is wanting us to do and the direction that comes from improving your attention and analytical meditation, wouldn't it be a problem to be part of Western society?
No, I don't think so, because it's not like everyone in the Western society is going that way. And there is this phenomena called the tipping point. And it's when, over the history of humanity, where we get to a point where there's a radical change in the worldview. And this tipping point has happened a number of times historically. And one such tipping point was, it wasn't that long ago where actually slavery was sort of accepted. But for that to be abolished, we didn't need like more than 50% of the world's population to say it's a bad thing. In fact, all we need, and studies show this, is we need about 10% of the world population saying that slavery is bad, and then it will get abolished, because there'll be a transformation. And similarly here, particularly with this worldview that the source of happiness lies within ourselves and not out there, then this sort of way of thinking I read an article where this person was saying, this was already some years ago, that there are about 6 or 7% of the world's population have this sort of worldview. And so we need to nudge it up to 10%, and then we can really have a radical transformation on this planet. And so then we as an individual, if we can do our best to be part of that, then even though we're just one single person, then if everyone, enough people do that, then you may find in the not too distant future, there's this radical transformation in the modern world. And I see signs of it sort of happening in pockets around the world already. So there is some hope that this will happen. And then we can make a really radical transformation in the planet. And then we'll maybe be able to actually save the planet, not destroy it, as we unfortunately are doing quite quickly at the moment. So we can be part of that change.
Is there time for one more question, Glen?
One more question, yeah.
So Chava said that she finds that external noises provoke anger and frustration within her and disturb her relaxation and focus.
Yeah, yeah, very good question. As I mentioned just earlier in the session, noise is one of the biggest distractions in this practice. And so therefore, to meditate at home, to find a quiet place. If we don't have a quiet place, I highly recommend these noise cancelling headphones. I find them very helpful. But let's say we have a relatively quiet place at home and we meditate okay. But then on a particular morning, we're trying to meditate and the neighbour's doing some home renovation and they're banging away with a hammer constantly. Then if there is some ambient noise, if we have aversion to that, we go, oh no, noise, go away, go away. Then we're going to get very agitated and then there will be a complete mess. So rather, if there is some ambient noise, particularly that repetitive noise, then what we can do is we can then simply switch to using the noise as the object for shamatha. There we go. We have a noise there. We can, for that short period of time, instead of using the breath or whatever we're using, switch to the noise. Just listen to the noise of the hammer going next door and the person renovating the house. And there we go. We can use the noise as a basis for meditation. And so then we'll have an object to focus on for shamatha. And then also what will happen is, because now we are seeing that noise as useful for practice, we won't develop the aversion, which means that in future, if a little bit of noise comes, we won't go, oh, go away. We'll actually just be able to be present without getting agitated by the noise. So this is what we can do. I think can be very helpful. Let's finish there because we've run out of time. And so let's also, again, dedicate not only today's sessions, but also yesterday's sessions, this whole weekend. We can dedicate all the efforts we've put together through this weekend retreat on the basis of this Shantideva dedication prayer. So as I read it out again, you might like to reflect on the words of the dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Thank you. And I hope to see at least some of you back again online in, I think, 2 weeks' time. We'll be doing a compassion practice weekend. We'll be looking there at how to cultivate loving kindness, compassion, joy, equanimity. Also, we'll be looking at how to deal with anger and attachment, and also how to exchange this sort of self-centered attitude for an attitude of cherishing others. So these are some of the things we'll be covering, I think, in 2 weeks' time for the Compassion Weekend Retreat. So thanks for attending. Hope you got something out of it. Looking forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Glen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Glen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Glen.
Thanks much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Glen.
רק כמה מילים לפני שאנחנו נפרדים. קודם כל, תודה רבה לכם שבחרתם להשתתף בתרגול הנהדר הזה עם מורה יקר מאוד. מי שרוצה ככה להעניק מנדיבות ליבו לגלן ולעמותת ידידי הדרמה שמפעילים את הפעילות הזו, מוזמן לעשות את זה בלינק שאני מצרפת כאן עכשיו. יש שם את כל פרטי האופנים השונים להעביר את הכסף. שוב, תודה רבה ושיהיה שבוע טוב.
תודה רבה, thank you.
תודה רבה לך.
Thank you so much.
ביי.
ביי ביי, תודה רבה.
Bye, Tammy. Nice to see you all.